Welcome to the LeaderCast podcast, a weekly deep dive into the stories that transformed our guests into leaders worth following. I'm your host, Joe Boyd. If you've been enjoying the podcast, thank you so much for being a listener. One simple thing you can do to help us out is give a review wherever you listen. Today's guest is my very good friend, Ray Attiyah. Ray is a serial entrepreneur. He is the author of the book, Run, Improve, Grow, and he is a recreational poker player. So we're going to talk about poker today. Mr. Ray Attiyah.
Hello, Joe.
Welcome. Happy to have you here on the LeaderCast podcast. I've got to interview several of my friends on the podcast and lots of people I don't know. Probably no one I know quite as well as you. So we'll get into some fun stuff. You're all over the LeaderCast platform, so folks will be able to hear you on our panel at Super Teams coming up here in a few weeks in October. And you have a ton of videos and webinars and stuff, so there's plenty of ways for people to learn from Ray Attiyah on LeaderCast. So today we're just going to have a little fun and get to know your story a little bit, and specifically one particular part of it. See how it goes. How's that sound?
That sounds great. Looking forward to it, Joe.
All right. So you are a recreational poker player. Is that true?
That's what I would be defined as a recreational poker player. Yes.
What does that
mean? Not amateur, not professional.
That's what recreational means. It's somewhere in the middle.
I guess recreational means I don't do it for a living.
Yeah.
But I do it well enough to be ranked. I've got, I think, $250,000 plus in live tournament winnings. So I can tell you the IRS doesn't consider me a professional player.
Yeah.
I'm not I guess somebody who just shows up on Friday and Saturday and plays and, they're just to have fun. I do it competitively.
All right, so we've never had a poker themed podcast at LeaderCast to my knowledge. So we're gonna just talk poker here in a little bit. Most folks know I spent 10 years in Vegas and had some poker interactions. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Before we do that though, for those, I said you're all over the platform, but I'm sure there's plenty of folks that don't know who you are right now, who are listening on their commute to work or whatever. I know, but tell the rest of the world a little bit about who you are. If we were in an elevator for 2 minutes or less. What do you tell people? What's Ray? What are you all about? What have you devoted your life to? What are you doing these days?
I guess my big why is I am, the voice of the fearless frontline. So for the last 20 plus years, I have dedicated myself to working in various industries, mostly manufacturing, and giving the folks in those industries a voice and empower them. I've developed a system called Run, Improve, Grow, which is a leadership system of how do you trust your frontline to run the business without management involvement, to free up leaders to work on, improve, and grow functions, which is their highest and best use. And then just across the board in terms of my business activities, I started my first business when I was 26. I've invested in, acquired, or started up over 20 different businesses over the last many decades. Most recently, I've invested in a renewable energy business that focuses on mid-size, commercial size, solar installations. And most recently, I started up and exited a ramp company that made aluminum ramps for wheelchairs and helped start that. And really, it was supposed to be an experiment to trial Run, Improve, Grow leadership system. So education-wise, I am an engineer, industrial engineer from Rutgers, and I've got my master's from Xavier, and I used to be an adjunct professor there. Personally, I've got 3 daughters, who 2 of them actually really enjoyed poker at a young age.
All right, so we want to talk about, here's what I thought we'd do today, a little different. So there have been tons of books written about various comparing leadership or using different metaphors for it, right? So like, what can you learn from baseball or whatever? And we thought it might be fun to talk a little bit about competitive poker and what the leadership lessons that you have taken out of or brought to your slightly more than a hobby of playing poker. we'll try to do it in such a way that you poker enthusiasts might be excited, but also we know a ton of you don't play poker and maybe don't even know how. So, but let's kind of dive in a little bit. Tell me first of all how before we get into that stuff, why did poker? Why was it interesting to you? And kind of, I don't even know if I've ever asked you this specifically. How did you start playing poker? How did you get into it?
So, so why is it attractive for me? I think, I'm an engineer, got a very strong math skill. So, poker had a lot of the game theory concepts. So it had the math, the, calculations, game theory, and it's also just a good competitive sport. So I never did it for the money. If there's anything that I actually become a somewhat, not a great poker player is because I don't play for the money. Sometimes I make decisions that others would make who play for the money.
Yeah.
So, so for me, it was a hobby that I felt like I can be good at, but also it gave me a place to be social.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, so you asked me about how I got started. My wife will tell you I started at the worst time possible. I started it right after the birth of our first daughter, and I was playing online. So, I would stay up, when she would wake up in the middle of the night and needs to be fed. I did some of the feedings, and I would just stay up and play online. So that would be how I got started, just online. And then I finally made it to a live poker casino. And I got to tell you, it was super intimidating.
Yeah.
Walking in and actually seeing who you're playing against. And I just remember there was one player, we referred to him as Batman, very intimidating.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fun now because now people come into the casino for the first time, and I'm that person
You can say I'm Batman. You can, yeah.
I'm Batman. Oh yeah. So, and it was interesting because the gentleman named Batman, he's a banker, and he said, Ray, I finally figured out why you play. You spend all day long helping people in your businesses, and you come here and see if you could screw with some of us.
Yeah.
And kind of, so for me, the mental game of poker is the fun part, much more than the cards or the money.
Before we go any further, I feel compelled to say that, and I know you have this thing where you say poker isn't gambling, but there's gambling involved for sure, right?
There's an element of chance in it.
Yes, sure.
Yes.
But I feel compelled to say, for folks that might have an issue with gambling, that might hear this and be very excited to go play poker, do you have like some words of advice or wisdom or around folks that maybe this isn't the best hobby for everyone? Anything you want to say about that?
Yes. Yeah. So, I have this debate often with my wife because she says it's gambling. And I try to tell her that gambling is when you're playing against the house.
Yeah.
So you're playing roulette, you're playing blackjack, craps, and slot machines. You're playing against odds, and there's no skill. There's a little bit of skill in blackjack in terms of, hit or not.
Yeah.
But overall, those odds are meant to be in the favor of the house all the time. When you're playing poker, not video poker, but real live poker, you are playing against other players.
Yeah.
So the element of skill matters a lot more. So I love the guys who come in at 2:00 in the morning and they're there Friday night and they just had a lot to drink and they start gambling while we're playing poker.
Yeah.
So they're playing reckless and we're playing a game that we make decisions on. So I think the big distinction is you're playing against other players, just like business. And we're going to get into that, but just like business, you make a bet and you think that you're going to outplay your opponent.
Yeah.
Now the house makes a little bit of out of the rake. That's how they keep the lights on and pay the dealers. But at the end of the day, there's a lot less game of chance in poker than there is in the other gambling activities. And by the way, a federal judge in New York did say that poker is not gambling and it's a game of skill. So I have a legal decision that supports that. But is there an element of chance? Yes. Just like the chance of somebody introducing you and I together. There's always that element of chance or luck in it. But in poker, it's much more skill than it is luck.
Yeah. Makes sense. My disclaimer will be,
Was that convincing? Was that convincing for those people who
with my disclaimer, you need to agree to this. If you know you have a gambling addiction or a potential compulsion, maybe play chess. Maybe poker isn't the best game for you.
Or play poker in a game that doesn't require money.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is how my daughters actually were playing when they were younger. WSOP downloads and you're playing for free chips. It's not real. Yeah. It's not real money.
There you go.
So
That's
yes,
all. I just wanted to get that out there because I don't want emails from people's spouses or partners in a year saying,
So here's the one thing I'll tell you. If you're not good at poker, do not play poker because you will lose.
Yeah.
If you play the other games in the casino and you're not good at it, you still have a chance of only losing a little bit. But if you play poker and you're not good at it, guarantee you will lose everything.
All right, let's move on to some. I'm curious if we were going to outline a book real quick. If you were going to write a book on, say, the 3 or 5 lessons you've learned about leadership playing poker, what do you think? What's the first one? What would be the first chapter, the first leadership lesson?
I think there's an element of selecting the right hands.
Yeah.
Okay. So just like in leadership, it all starts with the quality of your team and quality of your people. So it's knowing how to select which hands to play and better yet, which hands not to play.
Yeah.
So just like you're interviewing, you're going through the process of interviewing people. How do I know who should I hire? Who should I bring on board?
Yeah.
So there is an element of which hands should I play and which hands should I not play? Because if I happen to, have this hand, most likely I'm dominated. So the element of selecting the right people and building that team, which is the hands you play or the cards you play, I think is one of the most critical decisions you make before you even start betting.
Yeah.
Should I even play this hand? Should I even interview this person? Should I hire this person? I think that element of making that decision is really critical.
So a little bit of my poker journey is very different than yours and not as, I don't play nearly as much anymore. But when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, I was a working actor in Las Vegas in a show at the Rio Casino called Tony and Tina's Wedding. I think I made $100 a show, which was not enough to live on. And there were many nights I would take that $100 and try to make it more at the poker table. I found for me, I was purely playing for the money, but it was back when 60 or $80 was a ton of money to me. So my goal would always be to make like $80 off my 100. And so what I learned was I could almost always do that if I mucked almost every hand. If I just got in on that one good hand. Then there's like poker courtesy where you got to still sit around for an hour. But
yes,
but
don't do it. They call that a hit and run.
Yeah, that makes people mad. But that's tying into what you just said, because I would say, I always tell people it's a game that can actually get really boring if you play it right, because you're doing a lot of not playing, and there's probably some parallel there to we use the phrase forcing a hand in real life, right?
Yes, and ultimately, you have to learn how to say no. So when you said the word muck, for those of you who don't know what that word is, mucking means folding.
Yeah.
So you got to muck a hand and you fold it. And I remember playing in a tournament. It was one of the bigger tournaments that I was invited to because I won a tournament here in Cincinnati. And I was invited to play in a larger tournament. As part of winning this tournament, you get an invitation, hotel, and all that. And my third day of the tournament, I played for 8 hours. And in those 8 hours, I played 6 hands.
Wow.
Played six or seven, but what I end up doing,
which is probably like iPad. 10 minutes, right? Of the 8 hours.
Yeah. So each hand approximately is about 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah. So you're doing a lot of nothing.
You're playing 2 to 3 minutes an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you get cards, you look at them and you fold them. And I was in a short middle stack position, which I didn't have enough chips to really, they call it, splash around and play a lot of hands. But I was able to work my way up the leaderboard just by letting everybody else bust out.
Yeah.
So you're not trying to win all the hands. The objective of poker is win big hands and lose little hands. So meaning that, or I'm sorry, pots. Win big pots and lose small pots. So you're gonna lose some pots and you're gonna win some pots. The key is the size of the pot and how big of a bet did you make. So you have to learn how to fold, and you win poker tournaments by learning how to fold good hands.
That sounds like chapter 2 of our book. We would call "Win Big Pots, Lose Small Pots."
Yes.
Do you have any examples of real life business where you think about that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, and if I look at the making bets, I have, as I said before, I've started, invested in, or acquired like 20 different businesses. When I invest in the businesses, I make small bets, and then before I continue on with that, the company has to then perform to a certain level before I make another bet on them. But I have to learn how to close up a company. That was last year, after the pandemic was subsided. A business that we had started, 7, 8 years ago, we just made the decision to fold it. And it was time to close it. And, I'm not going to keep, putting money into something that I don't think has got the best opportunity. So we lost a little bit of money, I wouldn't say a lot, but a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Whereas one of my big wins, I gave them a little bit of money. This is the Ramp company. Upside Innovations, gave them a little bit of money when they first started in 2009. They proved out some things. Here's a little bit more money. Here's a little bit more money. And then eventually when they started, performing, I made bigger bets. And so you have to learn how to, make a bet, make some decisions, and know how to fold them, just like venture capital. And the worst, people who lose these big pots, they have pocket aces. And the flop comes 5, 6, 7, and the turn's a 9, the river's a 10. There's no chance if somebody's in there with you that pocket aces wins at that point. It may have been the perfect starting hand, but at some point in time, you have to learn how to fold it.
Yeah, which obviously is really, it's hard in poker, but it can be harder in real life, especially if it's your company, if you're an entrepreneur, and probably if you're it's interesting. You think about it's just a metaphor, right? But I'm sure people are listening and thinking about their actual life, thinking, I might need to muck this hand. Like, any thoughts when you find yourself actually in a position, you mentioned it as an investor, but now I'm thinking more as even as an employee, or what you're doing, or even the path of work that you're going down, kind of feeling like, oh, this feels like a hand I need to fold.
Yeah. One of the hardest skills to really master in poker is emotional regulation. And, you're really trying to get somebody in the objective, as Batman told me, your job here is to kind of screw with people, right? So the emotional regulation of getting somebody to make a bad decision because they've made a bet and now they're over invested in a hand that needs to be folded. And you look for people who cannot fold. And that you can't bluff them, so don't try to bluff them. But also know you're going to get paid off big if you hit your hand, because they don't know how to fold. And, in real life, you have to decide on, okay, am I in the right job? Am I with the right company? Am I in the right career? But, I've had to, terminate partnerships with people because you have to sit back and look at this and say, this doesn't make sense anymore. So when you they call it a sunk cost, throwing good money after bad, because you don't want to make the decision. So the decision you're making is, I'm going to maintain status quo.
Yeah.
That is a decision by not changing courses. So you have to learn how to fold and say, at some point in time, this doesn't make sense to continue this investment.
Love it. So I'm curious about, you had a pretty significant run one year at the main event and got on TV and whatnot. I remember watching you from my living room. I think this does get a little insider poker world, but was it Phil Hellmuth? Someone was at your table.
Phil Hellmuth, yes.
So
the poker brat, as they call it. My kids even knew that was his title, the poker brat.
So he's probably one of the 2 or 3 most famous poker players in the world. which again, if you don't watch poker, who cares? But he is. So I'm curious, just what was that like? How was your interaction with someone? Because as a recreational player, even though I'm sure you're quite confident, here is one of the top pros in the world. I'm curious what your thoughts were at the table.
Well, it's interesting. His personality on TV, when we were able to get on ESPN, and how we were playing at our table before we got on TV changed dramatically. So he really puts on a good show for the cameras. There was a gentleman from Russia who was playing at our table. So the two of them knew how to ham it up for the cameras.
Yeah.
What I decided to do when I was playing against him, I had the chip lead on the table. I had about 500,000 chips when the average was probably even less than 100,000, maybe a little more than 100,000. So I was doing very well in the first 2 days. He had about 50, 60,000. So he was low on chips. So I ended up in the hand with him, and I decided not to bust him out, but instead make a point that I can be very nitty. So the term nitty is basically scared. So because we're going to be playing with these same folks, 9 people, for 12 hours. So back to the boring aspect of it, it's boring. You're with the same people for 12 hours. So we were early on. I ended up having pocket tens. Long story short, I have a full house. He has a straight. So my full house is better than straight. But I acted very scared, and I only check called him every hand, and he got out of his seat. And he likes to blow up on people when they outplay him.
Yeah.
So he got up out of the seat after the hand was over, didn't say a word, because I had the best hand the whole time. And his interview afterward with ESPN, he actually mentioned that I end up with a straight, somebody ends up with a full house, and they're check calling. So what my objective was to kind of act one way, so that later on I could actually play a lot more aggressive, but act as if I always have it. So I decided to, position myself as a very scared, concerned about the chips player.
Yeah.
So that later on I can take advantage of that persona that they have me on as a nitty player.
Plus it guaranteed you had TV time that way.
That was it. And then, my phone blew up. My kids were getting calls from all their friends. Hey, your dad's on TV. So that was a bit distracting. I have to say that it was very, very distracting. Yeah. But it was a fun experience.
All right, that's just a fun story. So let's. Do we have a third chapter, a third leadership lesson from poker that we haven't talked about?
So what were the two so far? We had the knowing the hands to fold. Was the second one the emotional regulation? Was that the second one?
The second one I said was big pots, small pots.
Okay.
We could say 3 was emotional regulation. So now we can do 4.
Okay. So I think the other one would be really understanding why people play.
Yeah.
So this is not what you learn in the rule books. This is not the hand ranking of which one's better. This is really understanding the player. So when we have team members on our team, why do they work at this company? Why do they work? Are they part of this industry? Why are they part of this team? What drives them? So this is the advanced level of poker of really understanding why do people play. And as I mentioned, again, Batman nailed it. He said, you come here to, they know that I'm not there necessarily for the money. Some people are there because they want to get away from their spouse and they want a place to drink. Mm-hmm. There are some people there who really play for the money, and they're annoying because they're grinders, and they're so if you've seen the movie Rounders, you see the grinders, and there are some people there that just love the excitement and love the rush. So I think there's understanding that motivation of why they play helps you make a decision of their risk tolerance. Helps you make a decision about, what time do they have to leave? And as you mentioned, if you understood that you're there for your $100, and, so when you played for the $100 and you wanted to double it was because you were there for the money, because you're like, $100 is not going to be enough for me to make a living. So they knew. I played against a player one time in Connecticut, and he would occasionally open up his wallet to see how much money he had left.
Yeah.
So I knew that he was playing for the money, but also he didn't have a big bankroll.
Yeah.
So he can get bluffed out of a big pot because he doesn't want to take that chance.
Right.
So really, again, understanding the why. So from a business perspective, do you understand the whys behind your team members? Do you understand why your customer buys from you? Do you understand why your supplier, works with you? So getting beyond the surface level of making an assumption that your why is their why, I think that's the piece that really differentiates the top players with others, so that they can understand how they're going to make decisions.
Yeah. That's really good. And I think you've obviously understood your own why. Sometimes, it's a little different than the Simon Sinek TEDx talk, but understanding our own why, like why we do the things we do, is obviously super important ourselves, right? So that we know. And I just went through kind of a visioning exercise for myself, kind of figuring out, kind of just imagining a future where I would be very happy, and doing some writing around that. Super simple, but it was very helpful to kind of help me remember, I'm doing certain things I do now because of who I am and what I care about. But in the day-to-day, we can even lose touch with our own why, right? And so...
Absolutely. And I'll say this, my why for poker, when I had the businesses before I sold many of them, was a place for me to go recharge. You may think that that's crazy. People feel like, you go to play poker to recharge.
Mm-hmm.
It became automatic for me. It became a social place for me to connect with other people. But the aspect of playing cards and doing the math and figure that out was very, relaxing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Where others get highly stressed from that.
Right.
During COVID, when the casinos closed up, or even worse, when they opened up and only the players that were the grinders showed up, that social aspect went away. So I'm like, you know what? So I started playing a lot more golf. So you have to kind of understand, like, why did I play?
Yeah.
And actually, it's interesting. My book here, The Fearless Front Line, that tournament that I mentioned I won, that I got a seat into the Vegas one, I was actually editing my manuscript during the tournament.
There you go.
And I folded every hand for 90 minutes because I had something to keep me occupied.
Yeah.
Guaranteed, if I had my manuscript, I wouldn't have won the tournament, because I couldn't have lasted 90 minutes in that kind of tournament. But I think it's important. Like, I remember being on a board of a nonprofit, and they were asking, how do we get our board members more engaged? And I made a comment of, let's find out why they are on the board.
Yeah.
And I remember this one other board member who was a CFO. He said, we don't need to know that. We know why they're there. I'm like, do you? He like stifled that whole conversation, and it's like, we know why they're there. Let's just tell them what we want them to do. Very dismissive. It's like, all right, good luck with that.
Right. And I think, I'm way into the Enneagram. I talk about that in a lot of these episodes. We've never actually had you officially assessed, Ray, but you're straddling the 7-8 line, I'm pretty sure. But why I like it.
So I was sorry to interrupt, but there's a good example of poker right there.
Yep.
Is you build a hypothesis and you test it.
Yeah. Yes.
So you're putting me on a 7-8.
Yeah, I know it's a hypothesis that I'm sure I'm right about. You're just, in the Enneagram world, it's not cool to type people. They're supposed to type themselves. I'm just telling you where it's going to go. But
that's good.
why I like that assessment, and actually just remind me after this, I'll hook you up, because I would like you to do it. There's only one assessment that I think is really accurate. But anyway, it's the only sort of, quote, personality test that is primarily concerned with your motivations. It's not really concerned with your behavior. It's concerned about why you do certain things. And that can manifest differently in different people. So I am a 7, and the primary motivation of a 7 is to escape pain and experience pleasure. And without the Enneagram as a tool, I never would have figured that out about myself. But now that I know it, I can see it in good and bad ways happening in my life. And so I would just encourage folks, it doesn't have to be the Enneagram, but have some system or methodology within those you lead to be able to talk about folks' motivations. And what I mean is, like, their instincts of why they want to do certain things. Because if you don't, you will assume everyone's the same as yours. And generally, that's only true for about 10% of people in the world.
Yeah.
So once you realize that some folks motivation is security, while some is achievement, and others is just a fun experience, and others is to be seen as smart or wise. Once you start to realize that stuff, you can help folks. First of all, I think kind of ride that momentum to help them do their work better, but also see where they might be out of balance and say, look, life isn't all about escaping pain. There's other opportunities to be motivated in different ways. So that's my Enneagram speech, but it made me think of it. Ray, we are out of time. The good news is we hang out all the time, so we can keep talking, just people can't listen. Thank you so much. I do want to really encourage people, check out Super Teams coming out here soon, where you're on the panel. Also, if you're a LeaderCast 365 member, there's, I think, at least 2 webinars that Ray and I have done together, and a ton of videos with Ray talking about things besides poker. And I think you would really all love all that. Ray, if folks want to get in touch with you or connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Probably the best one for me is LinkedIn.
Okay.
So they can look at my LinkedIn profile and connect with me, and happy to chat with them and give them some advanced tips on poker or leading the fearless front line.
All right. Thanks, Ray. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Joe. This was fun.